Hi, good morning, everyone, and thank you for having us at the meeting, and also thanks to the ARM for putting together such a good meeting. And I just want to pause and say I'm humbled by the collective progress and the excitement in the cell and gene therapy area today. It's a great time to be part of the revolution. Here's the forward-looking statements. I'd refer you to our website to dig into these should you choose to do so. So a little audience participation. Before today, how many people had heard of Gamida Cell? Raise your hand. Oh, that's great. Okay, so I'll kind of cater my presentation to those needs. But Gamida Cell is very similar to some of the companies that we've heard present today. We're very focused on patients and caregivers and patient outcomes and really trying to deliver on unmet needs, specifically initially in the transplant space. But we're advancing our cell therapies through our proprietary cell expansion technology, which I'll talk about in just a minute. And we have our U.S. headquarters in Boston. And we went public about a year ago, last October, which at the time I think was one of the worst months in history of the stock market. Although, if you look at the last couple of days, this October is off to a similar start. I mentioned our proprietary cell expansion technology. It's based on nicotinamide, or NAM, which is a universal cell expansion technology. It can expand any cell type, including stem cells and NK cells, which I'm going to spend a little bit more time on today. And it's designed to both enhance the number of cells, but also the functionality of cells. NAM plays a key role in metabolic reprogramming of cells, and also allows cells to maintain their functionality and phenotype as they expand. So stem cells still act like stem cells, and NK cells still act like NK cells. We've retained worldwide rights to our pipeline, although I agree with some of the previous comments that it's important to build both partners through industry and through other partnerships. Our most advanced program is Gamida Cell. It's a late phase 3 product in hematologic malignancies. We're also studying Gamida Cell in severe aplastic anemia, although I won't go into that program today because of the time. And lastly, I'll touch on GMDA 201, which is our NK program and platform. So usually I spend about 3 or 4 slides on the unmet need in transplant, but I'm guessing given the audience, you guys fairly well understand the limitations in the transplant community. Obviously, there's issues with trying to find an appropriate donor and a matched donor. There are time to engraftment issues with a lot of cell sources, which leads to longer hospitalizations and ultimately bigger costs to the system. And then there's complications such as GVHD that we're all familiar with. But probably most shockingly, to me at least, was that of the approximately 13,000 patients that are eligible for transplant, and this is looking forward, only about 8,000 patients in the U.S. will actually go on to receive an allotransplant. This means that 40% of patients that need a transplant never get to a transplant. And in many cases, they're already in the system and actively searching for a match. And there are a lot of reasons why they never make it to transplant, but there's a lot of significant unmet need for these patients and their caregivers. I'm not going to go into significant depth on the process for Gamida Cell, but this is a basic schema of the manufacturing process. The treating physician selects a cord blood unit that's specific to each patient. We then ship that off to our manufacturing facility where the cells are separated. We culture and expand the stem cells, and we preserve the immune cells. We ship both bags back to the infusion center, where both bags are infused into the patient. And consistent with the other presentations, there are about 672 steps that go behind the scenes on this, but our goal is to make this as simple as possible for the treating physician and ultimately for the patients and their families. I'm not going to go into a lot of depth on the phase 1/2 study, but this is a summary of our phase 1/2 study for Gamida Cell. It was studied in patients aged 12 to 65 in heme malignancies who were eligible for transplant and did not have a family-matched related donor. They went through myeloablative conditioning. They went on to receive transplant with Gamida Cell, and then we monitored them for an extensive period of time for follow-up. The primary endpoint was time to neutrophil engraftment, and there were a number of secondary endpoints as well. This is probably one of the most impressive slides in the deck. We saw rapid neutrophil engraftment with Gamida seen in red. The median time to engraftment was 11 days for Gamida versus what's shown in black, which comes from a CIBMTR cohort, where the average time to engraftment was 21 days. So we demonstrated a 50% reduction in time to engraftment. And as you well know, time to engraftment correlates directly with clinical outcomes, time in hospital, complications, and all of the other things that go along with that. So this is our phase 3 registration study, which is currently enrolling patients. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because the good news is that it's exactly like the phase 1/2 study, except for now we have more patients, more centers, and a control arm. If it's not broke, don't fix it. So we're looking at 120 patients now, randomized to 2 different arms, either Gamida or core blood, and the same primary endpoint and same secondary endpoints. I just got an update this morning, we're now in 48 sites across the US, EU, and Asia, and we expect to complete enrollment of this study by the end of this year with top-line data readout early next year. So it's happening pretty fast, and I'm envious of those who are already discussing commercial products. Oh, I should also note that of the 45 sites that are in a clinical trial, or 48 sites now in our clinical trials, 23 of them are in the US and are part of some of the transplant centers that we're already engaged with. So being the commercial guy, I typically spend a lot of time on commercial prep, but I'll just talk about how we're preparing to bring Gamida more broadly to patients. And I talk with my CEO a lot about this. He's very interested in the scientific and clinical part of things, but I'm interested in making sure that as many patients that deserve to get Gamida can get it. So here's a couple of things we're doing. We're engaged with top transplant centers. Obviously, I just mentioned the clinical trial sites. In the US, there are about 70 transplant centers that make up 80% of the patient volume or patient opportunities, so it's relatively concentrated, and we're still working to try and quantify what the exact opportunity is for Gamida. We're also consistent with the theme that everyone's talked about as far as making things simple. We're also building a world-class patient and hospital support service and system so that it's as simple as possible, and we take on as much as we can to make it as seamless as possible. We're also working to make sure that we can bring it broadly to patients, making sure that from an access perspective that we have a path for reimbursement and that patients are taken care of and can afford to get Gamida. And then we're obviously scaling our commercial manufacturing capabilities to ensure that we can meet the first 2 or 3 years of demand and beyond. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on our NK program, but given the excitement in the NK space, it's worth touching on briefly. GDA 201 is our NK platform, and it's designed to enhance the power of NK cells. This is the study that's being done at the University of Minnesota. It's a phase 1 study evaluating the maximum tolerated dose for GDA 201, and it's also looking at, obviously, response rates and toxicity. It's looking at both non-Hodgkin's lymphoma as well as myeloma, and they go through a standard Flu/Cy lymphodepleting regimen followed by GDA 201 plus either rituximab in lymphoma or elotuzumab in multiple myeloma. So the early findings, this was presented earlier this year at TCT, is that there are no dose-limiting toxicities, GVHD or neurotox. The most common grade 3/4 adverse events were neutropenia and hypertension. And there was one patient with a grade 3 CRS that was promptly resolved with tocilizumab. This is the swimmer's plot that was presented at TCT and for a study that's really looking at dose and toxicity. This is quite impressive. As you can see, the top 3, the green bars at month 1 are complete responses. 2 of those patients went on to receive transplant, and as far as we've followed up so far, are completely cured. The top patient hit complete response and then was offered a transplant, and because he was symptom-free at this point and because of his lifestyle, he chose not to go on to transplant. And subsequently had some progressive disease and then moved, so he was lost to follow-up. Probably most interesting on this slide, in addition to the complete responses, is patient 009. If you see that yellow bar there, that was a partial response at month 1. And we have data now going out longer than this, but at month 4, the tumor continued to shrink. And for those of you that know NK cells, is they only stay in your system for about 7 to 10 days. And so to see the tumor continuing to shrink suggests that there might be an innate immune response happening. So we're digging more into patient 009 and stay tuned on that. So encouraging so far with GDA 201. The key takeaways is well tolerated. We found, we think, a maximum tolerated dose. We've seen clinical activity, especially on the lymphoma side of things. We're still exploring what we're seeing on the multiple myeloma side. We hope to complete phase 1 in the very near future. We're working on cryopreservation and making sure that this is available and we preserve the NK cells. We're initiating a phase 1/2 study, multi-center study in the United States next year. And then obviously we're evaluating different antibodies and making sure we're finding the right match for the right disease that we're studying. We're also evaluating GDA 201 in solid tumors. And we announced earlier this year that we're in a collaboration with Editas on gene modification of our NAMs NK cells in some non-disclosed targets. So just in summary, Gamida is our most advanced program in bone marrow transplant. Again, we're hoping to complete enrollment this year in the next couple of months with top line readout early next year. So preparing for a launch by 2021. A lot of work to do there. GDA 201 is extremely exciting and part of our NK platform. We're going to advance that and stay tuned for more data on that late this year or early next year. And then I'm looking forward to continuing to build the capability of Gamida Cell and the commercial capability as we get ready for a couple of launches. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.